This ends the Gemara the first day Yom Tov. Kumlana Block Gemara. We are now learning that Chobeis Amid Aleph. This is today's Gemara, the second day Yom Tov Sukkos. So we had a question that what's pshat in the Mishnah? Beis Shammai says that you're not allowed to do hatmana. So the first answer we gave was you didn't do an erev tavshilin, and Beis Hillel still allows it because we allow you one. Rava comes over like Rav Huna said. Rava comes over and gives another answer. Lo olam shehiniach. We're talking about you did make erev tavshilin. So why would Beis Shammai say you cannot make a cholent? You know why? Because when you're making a cholent, it's very clear you're not doing it for today. You're doing it for tomorrow. It's clear that you're doing something for outside of Yom Tov. We don't like that. Everything else you're cooking on Yom Tov for Shabbos, but if somebody walks in, you can argue it's being cooked for today, being baked for today. But hatamana, which takes hours and hours and hours, clearly you're doing it for the sake of Shabbos, and that's why Beis Shammai says you cannot do hatmana. Says the Gemara, Rav is a lo'ilam sheniach. You did make an eter shili, and yet v'shayni hatamana. Now the hatmana, the Muchemilus is very clear that daita the Shabbat ka'avid. You did it for the sake of Shabbos. Says Gemara, Esabai asks a question. Chananya says, Beis Shammai says, this is what Chananya said, and we had this previously. That Chananya said, according to Shammai, every single activity you want to do from Yom Tov to Shabbos, you have to do something prior to Yom Tov. So this is a continuation. You want to cook, you have to cook something before Yom Tov, like an egg or a piece of fish. You want to bake, you have to bake a challah before Yom Tov, and so on. Everything you're going to do, you have to do something before Yom Tov. So we'll say that this is a continuation. You want to do hatmana, you need to do hatmana before Yom Tov. And that's what Beis Shammai is saying. You didn't do hatmana before Yom Tov. That's why you cannot do hatmana Friday. Says the Gemara, that's a biased question of Rava. So it says, but if you did do hatmana before Yom Tov, you could do. But according to you, Rava, if it's so obvious you're doing it for the sake of Shabbos, it's forbidden. What does it help me if I do it before Yom Tov? That proves that Rava's logic is incorrect. So by ask Hanani said, if you don't bake the fast unless you made bread before Yom Tov. The aim of vashlin, a cook, Elikin alas, you made a cooked item. The aim tiny now do hatmana, Elikin hoyle chamin tmunim of Yom Tov. Unless you had something hidden, you did hatmana prior to Yom Tov. But it seems clearly, if you had something before Yom Tov, you made some kind of a chamit tmunin, like a chon something. Mia of it, it did it all right. I forgot the Muchemilus that the Shabbos covered. You know it's clear you're doing it on Friday for the sake of Shabbos. Elam Rabbi, I'll tell you what happened. What you happened was you cooked something before Yom Tov, have an egg, you made a challah, you forgot to do hatmana. And Chananya says that even though you made erev tavshilin for cooking and baking, because you didn't make an erev tavshilin for hatmana, that's why you cannot do it on Friday. And therefore, there's a Chananya according to Beis Shammai. Saying further, now stand up a minute and Michael, what actually happened here? We're talking about a minute made up of parts. The merze looks like you're building together. By putting it together, it looks like you're building. The Beis Shammai holds there's binyan mekalim. Shammai's opinion that even though we learned before that vessels, there's no binyan. Beis Shammai holds that when it comes to vessels, there is still building. There's no building is only on a permanent structure, not when it comes to kalim. According to Rashi, there's never building by kalim, only there might be other issues like smoothing, things like that. According to Taisus, if you build a keli from scratch, that is building, but we're talking about putting pieces together, parts together. When it comes to something portable, that's not called building, it's not really permanent. Ula equal to Rabbi Yehuda. Ula once came to the house of Rabbi Yehuda. Kama Shemaya came along his gabbai, and Zokaf Leila Shraga, and what he did was that he took some of the oil and he pushed it away from the wick so that the wick should burn out quicker. So that's what the gabbai of Ula, the Shamash of Ula did. Says Eser Rabbi Yehuda Lu, you turn around to Ula and say, what's going on here? It says on Shabbos you add oil to your fire. It's considered flaming it up. And by mistopping, if you take some oil away from your, let's say you have like a Hanukkah light, your oil in a wick, and you take some of the oil away, that's called extinguishing. Amalei said to him, "You're right. Lav adatoi. I didn't realize what he's doing. I never instructed him. He must have done it on his own. He must have done it on his own." So it says more further. Rav says, Rav came along and says that kanva shori. That let's say you take the wick and you want to take some of the ashes of the wick so that it can burn better. You're allowed to do that on Yom Tov. You're allowed to extinguish a candle. We said before you're allowed to do things in Tzedek Yom Tov, but you're allowed to extinguish a candle if you want to have marital relations, supposed to be in a dark room. Can you extinguish a candle on Yom Tov? Is it a tzedek? Why do you have to extinguish it? Move the candle somewhere else. Or you move somewhere else. Let's say you have nowhere else to go. Make some kind of a partition between you and the candle. You have no place, you have nothing, no material to make this partition. What do you do then? You can always cover the candle with some kind of a vessel. You don't have a vessel. My question is, can you extinguish the candle for this purpose or not? He said to him, also is forbidden. You're not allowed to. It's not oichel nefesh. You're not allowed to extinguish. So one has a question. I'll ask you a question. You're not allowed to extinguish a piece of wood. You want to save the wood. You're not allowed to because it's not doing it for the benefit of Yom Tov. You're doing it for the benefit of the wood. So you cannot do that. If the reason why you want to extinguish the fire is that the house shouldn't smoke up, or you don't want the pot to smoke up, it's permitted. So we see that it's considered tzedek Yom Tov, that you should enjoy the day. That is the author of that is Rabbi Yehuda, who said, Rabbi Yehuda's opinion that not only are you allowed to do things on Yom Tov for eating, but even things which are preparing, which are assisting, you're also permitted to do it on Yom Tov. When he says lachem means for any needs that you have. So therefore, according to him, this is considered a need. Tashmish Shamit is also considered a need, and so on and so forth. I'm telling you according to the Rabbanan. I'm following the Rabbanan that say only to do with food or something similar. So when it comes to extinguishing only food, are you allowed to extinguish? You have a fire burning in your house. Can you extinguish a fire on Shabbos? Hey, chadika the nefashos, question of life and death. No question. You're about to lose your asset, your house. What's it din then? It is forbidden. Same question. Angel has a question. You're not extinguish the fire on a piece of wood because you want to save the wood. But the the house shouldn't smoke. No, you want to save your money or the pot. You're allowed to. So you see clearly that you're allowed to do that. And so therefore, what's a big fire or smoking of the whole house? So it's tzedek Yom Tov. You should be able to extinguish the fire. Otherwise, your house will burn down. You have to sit in the rain. So you're benefiting Yom Tov to save the house. Again, this follows Rabbi Yehuda that said that even machshir, things which are not directly related to food, you can do the malachas on Yom Tov. I'm following the Rabbanan. Okay. Bottom line is, before we go back to Gemara, bottom line is that you're allowed to on Yom Tov. You're not allowed to start the fire because that's called noilad. You're not allowed to create a fire, but you're allowed to increase a fire on Yom Tov. But when it comes to extinguishing, even lessening a fire, you're not allowed to do on Yom Tov. And what's the logic? If you're allowed to increase the fire, why can't you lessen the fire? So the logic is that when you increase the fire, that directly benefits the food. When you lower the fire, the lower the fire doesn't directly benefit the food. You just removed a problem. The food might burn, so you remove the problem. So what are you supposed to do? So this is the law. When it comes to electric stoves, the bigger problem is the way it usually works is when you lower it, it shuts off and then it goes on to the next step and it goes back on. You're shutting off and you start turning on, and the problem there is turning on. You're starting a fire. When it comes to gas fires, what he's supposed to do, so the Mishnah Berurah says, what he's supposed to do is open another fire, which is smaller fire. Okay, this is a very big fire, it's burning your food. Take a fire from this fire, move it to another fire, and make a smaller fire, and then put the food on that. Ramosha Feinstein is very lenient. He argues, what's the difference lowering a fire or increasing the fire? He says you're allowed to lower a fire if the food, but this is only if the food is about to burn because the fire is too high. and it won't be edible anymore, or it'll be very, very difficult to eat. Then he says, what's the difference if you turn on another fire or you're lowering this fire? Both of them you're doing a malacha. So why bother turning on another fire when you can just lower this one? That's what he says. Everyone else argues with him for the reason I just told you. When you're increasing the fire, that whatever increase you're doing directly benefits the food. When you're lowering the fire, all you're doing is removing a problem. It's not benefiting the food, the lowering the fire, it's taking away the problem of the fire is burning the food. So that is the big argument. So generally, if you have no other fire available, only this fire, then a lot of people are lenient. They follow Ramosha, who says that you're allowed to lower it if it's going to burn the food. Otherwise, if you either you raise the pot, you put a few platters in between so that it doesn't burn the food anymore, or you start another fire. And we don't really like lowering fires. Okay, that's the general rule. Okay, let's continue. And this along the same vein, are you allowed to paint your eye in Yom Tov for medicinal purposes? So hey, if there's a sakana, your eyes in danger, there's no question. Going, for example, like a cataract or something, skin growing over your eye, or ditza that is, like something stuck and like a needle that pricked your eye, or dama, your eye full of blood, or dimasa, or you're full of, it's very, very teary, or katchot became very, very hot. So it depends. It's the beginning of a sickness. I have no question. Of course, you're allowed to do whatever medicine put up there, because sakonas ayin, we say, is like sakonas nefashis. You're allowed to do whatever it takes. Now, for the Shabbos, even on Shabbos, you're allowed to. However, it's already the end of this, whatever the disease is, coming to the end. Now, really, you're almost cured. Now you just have to play with your eye and open and close it to get used to again, and get used to the light. So, what's it in then? It is forbidden. We ask him a question. Because he's doing a sort of an Isser on Yom Tov, and Oichel Nefesh permitted. It's not really Oichel Nefesh. Can you or can't you? He asks the same question. You're not like extinguish the wood, but if it's some benefit for the house, no smoking in the house, it's all right. It's not smoking in the house, all right. The Shani Lake Kiddushin, we give the same answer before. Ameimar Shadi Lemichel Einem Menachem Shabbat. Ameimar allowed you to put that medicine around your eye on Shabbos if a guy wants to do that. Because remember, a guy is only Yisur Rabbanon, and medicine is also only Yisur Rabbanon because next time you might crush. So we say when it comes to a chayla, sick person, the shvus is permitted. You can have a guy doing it. He himself did it to himself. Not only he ruled this way, but he actually did it himself. Says the Gemara, what's your opinion? The Amar does not really say all the needs of a chayla allowed to do through a goy of Shabbos. The Amar said, anything which is not a sakana, anything if you're sick and it's not a question of life and death, you can't do it yourself, but you got to go to do it. It's only if you don't assisting the goy. You are helping the goy putting the medicine because you have to close your eye, to squint, you have to open your eye, and you're assisting. So how can you do that? It's not just the goy doing it, you're helping out. Amalei, he said to him, I want you to know you're not the only one who attacked me. He himself agrees with you when he attacked me. But I want you to know, Vishani, I answered him, if opening, closing the eyes, I'm not really doing anything. I'm just helping a little bit. That's called Messiah. I'm just helping a little bit. No substance to it at all, whatsoever. Faces over here. Dav Chobei is a very important thesis, the second to last thesis, even though it doesn't really relate at all to this Gemara here, and I don't know why exactly thesis is here. But thesis says that even though we always know you're not allowed to prepare from the first day Yom Tov to the second day Yom Tov, and for example, lighting candles, you have to wait until Tzeisak HaChavim before you can light the candles. Thesis says here, that the world has a minhag, middle of the thesis, Eim HaChavim. The world has a custom to light a candle from one day Yom Tov to the next. They're not worried if it's nighttime or not. So Tosfos is saying that in his time, everybody used to light on the first day for the second day, before it got dark. And you're not allowed to because you're preparing from one day Yom to the next. How can I do that? So he says, because even though it's not night, it's starting to get a little bit dark outside, you're allowed to. It's called Soirich, you're doing it for right now as well. Based on this, you're not allowed to prepare from Yom Tov, from one day Yom Tov to next Yom Tov. There's no question you're not allowed to do any malacha, cooking, baking, anything like that from the first day Yom Tov to the second day Yom Tov. But they talk about, are you allowed to take things out of the freezer, for example, that you need, that challah is in the freezer, you want it for the Suda, but it's frozen. So you want to take it out in the afternoon of the first day. Can you do that? Can you set the table? So the Chai Adam comes up with a heter that some people rely on, and basically it goes as follows. He says, a little bit based on this places here. He says that if the reason why you're not allowed to do that is because you should be doing it on the second day for the second day. But if you're doing that because you don't have time on the second day to do it, for example, you want to start your meal, you have guests as soon as they arrive. So anything which is involved only tircha, in other words, setting the table, setting the table, that kind of stuff, or something you couldn't do the second night, taking something out of the freezer, maybe if you have no choice, maybe you're allowed to do that. It's considered as if you're doing it for today, as if you're doing it for right now, not because you're trying to save time later, because you're not do that. You're doing it because you have no choice, because the meal has to start 7 o'clock, and I need to have whatever. Anyway, but generally we try not to do anything the first day Yom Tov the second day. But clearly you're allowed to have a goy setting up your table and doing all these things for the second day. Anything which is not a malacha, you're allowed to do. Most poskim hold you're allowed to do that. Okay, let's continue. Meimar allowed even to the second day of Rosh Hashanah, he allowed them also to paint their eye the medicine. What do you mean? Because the second day Yom Tov, is much more lenient. Rava said that maybe Yom Tov Rishon we had before. If somebody died on the first day Yom Tov, he's asking boy. I mean, you can only have goyim, but Yom Tov Sheni he's asking. So a regular Yom Tov the second day for a. Remember we said as far as burying somebody is treated as if it's a weekday. Even through the Rishana, when it comes to burying, we will be lenient. Mash'ein kain bebina. Mash'ein kain bebeya. Mash'ein kain when it comes to an egg, comes to Rishana. Rishana is different. It's like one long day. So how can you go ahead and be lenient and allow medicine the second day? Malay, he said to him, he said to him, remember we had an argument, he holds that the second day Yom Tov Rishana is no different than the second day of any other Yom Tov. That's why I was lenient. So he holds that even by an egg, the second day we are on Rosh Hashanah, we are lenient. Why do you want to be strict? Because maybe if the Adim came late and they had to make an extra day, and therefore it becomes like a long day like we had before. For the times of Ezra onwards, for the times of Ezra onwards, it never happened that El was 30 days, and therefore I believe Shana you're allowed to. The second day is just like another Yom. Anyway, Gemara continues. We don't make thick bread, but only thin ones. Right now, the Gemara thinks that they're discussing only Pesach. And the issue at hand here is if a lafa bread is too thick and it's considered chametz or not. So Beis Shammai said, "Ein oifen pas over b'Pesach." You're not allowed to make thick bread on Pesach and call it matzah if you're very careful. And Beis Hillel matir, Beis Hillel allows it. The kama pasava, when Beis Hillel says you're allowed to, what's considered the maximum thickness that you're allowed to? The maximum is a tefach, a fist. You can have thick matzah. Because we find the same thing by lechem haponim, tefach. If you remember lechem haponim, which was matzah, it wasn't chametz, it was matzah, and it was tefach thick. We learned in Menachem, so therefore it proves that you can have matzah up to a tefach. Rabbi Yosef asked a question to Rav Huna. I don't understand. Who worked in the Beis Hamikdash? Kainim, and amongst the Kainim, there's a special family who were skilled and they knew how to make lechem haponim. So we allow them to make matzah up to a tefach thick. When it comes to matzah and Pesach, everybody does it. You let everybody go ahead and make thick matzah. Number one. Number two, over there, they worked on the dough many times. In fact, 300 times as we'll learn, and they banged it away, and therefore it didn't rise. Our bread today, our flour, that is, it rises a tefach thick and still matzah. Number two. Number three, if it said this, over there, the wood was very dry. Remember, 2 B'Av and onwards, they no longer cut any more wood because there was some moisture. They only used very dry wood. So the fire was very intense. So therefore, it never had a chance to turn into chametz. Our wood is always a little bit moist. It's not as hot. And you're going to tell me that a tefach thick can still be matzah? Number 4, Im Amru Betanu Chama, oven day in the Beis Hamikdash was hot every single day, so it was always hot. Our ovens are not on all the time, so it never gets as hot. And you're going to say we can make matzah a tefach thick? Now, next, their ovens are made out of metal, it was very hot. Our ovens are clay, never gets that hot. So therefore, I disagree. So that's what the Gemara says. By the way, the Alter Rebbe writes in his Chulus that up to 20 years ago, so you're talking now about, let's say, 250 years ago, he writes, up to 20 years ago, the matzahs generally were thick. They were not a tefach thick, but they were thick. Now, he said, they introduced to have the thin matzah that we have today only started, 20 years ago. So in other words, roughly about 250 years ago. That's when thin matzahs began. Prior to that, it was thick. But in Yemen, they have a skill that they pass down from generation to generation in how to make thick matzahs, and it should still be 100% kosher matzah. But it's a skill that they passed on that only they use. The rest of the Klal Yisrael doesn't use thick matzahs for the reason we just said here. You have to be highly skilled. It's very, very difficult to make sure that it doesn't become chametz. Said the Gemara. So therefore, that's the Gemara originally thought that that's what it means. Passover, we're talking about for Pesach. We're talking about Pesach time. Says the Gemara, and that's why our Mishnah says you shouldn't bake thick bread. We're talking about on Pesach. Says the Gemara. I asked my teacher privately, Umane, who's my Rebbe Rav, Passover, what is my Passover? What do you mean Passover, thick bread? And he answered me, Pas Meruba. It doesn't mean thick bread. It means a lot of loaves of bread. Rikadam, the other say, I asked my teacher, Rav said, I asked my teacher personally, Umanu Rabbeinu HaKadosh, my Passover, and he said, Pas Meruba. Nothing to do with Pesach. I'm making a lot of loaves of bread. Is it considered too much hard work for Yom Tov? Is it a tircha? My call it Passover, so I call it thick. Because when you make dough for a lot of loaves of bread, it's very, very thick. In this region where this Tana came from, Pas Meruba, they used to name lots of bread, Pas Ava, they should call it thick bread. That's the way their slang, in their vernacular. Says the Gemara, so I understand. The whole problem here is, Beishamai says you're not allowed to make a lot of loaves of bread because you're working for nothing. Basil says you're allowed to, because remember we had before that the oven, it bakes better, all the bread benefits, even though all you need is one bread, you can have 10 breads in your oven. So Ma'ir Pesach, why does the Brisa highlight Pesach? I feel every Yom to the same issue. Says, well, you're right, Inachanami. The Tana beyond the Pesach, it happened to be when he said this law was Pesach. That's why he mentioned Pesach. In fact, Tanya Nami how we learned, even Pas Meruba, you shouldn't make too many loaves of bread. And beyond the Basil's matzah. Says the Mishnah further, he says, so 3 things. My family also, even though they're very stringent when it came in certain areas and they followed Shammai, in other areas they were very lenient. Number 1, mechabdin beis hamitas. They would sweep between the beds. Now, why should that be an issue? Now, the beds we're talking about here, they used to sit there and eat, the sofas, they used to recline on the sofas and eat. Now, obviously, there were crumbs all over the place. And they used to sweep between. And the issue of sweeping is that in the houses, there was dirt floors. And there were holes in the floors, and when you swept, you would cover the holes, fill the holes. So that's like chaylish, plowing and filling and building. Number 1, and they were lenient. Number 2, they would place spices Yom Tov on the coal to give a good fragrance. We'll soon see what that's talking about. And number 3, they would take a goat and they would tie to the bottom of the goat. Or right outside of the goat, they would tie down over there the innards of the goat, and parts of the goat they'll put on the outside. And they did it Pesach night to replicate the carbon Pesach that we did in the Beis Hamikdash. The Chachamim prohibited all of that. Says the Gemara, they did not allow you to sweep because you're filling the holes, nor did they allow you to do the spice on the coal. And the reason why they didn't allow it is it's not. Oichel nefesh is something that everybody benefits from. These fragrances are basically for the rich. It's not davar hashava l'chol nefesh. It's not something which is equal to everybody. And that's why many Rabbanim came out today and said, you're not allowed to smoke anymore on Yom Tov because so many people oppose smoking and don't smoke. It's no longer a davar hashava l'chol nefesh. It's not anymore suitable for everybody.
And I just ask you that this Mishnah, which just starts with Afhu Omer, that's continuing from the previous one. It's talking about Rabbi Gamliel.
The same Gamliel said in certain things we were very, very strict, but in certain things we were very, very lenient. And this is what he's trying to say, the contrast. No, don't think that we're like Beis Shammai, we're always mach. Certain things we're lenient as well. And the Chachamim disagreed. So Gemara now explains. Asi said, first of all, Asi came along and said, Machlek is the argument between the Chachamim, who said that's forbidden regarding putting the spices on for the fragrances on the coal, is only talking about the gamer. You wanted to put these beautiful fragrances into your clothing. So you put the clothing there, you're not allowed to. So what they would, they put a frying pan full of these, on top of the coal with these spices, and then the smoke would come up and it would give a very nice smell into their clothes. And so therefore, this is not really for my personal benefit. It's not oichel nefesh. It's not for me to smell. It's for my clothes to smell good. But if I did it just to make a good fragrance in the room so I can smell that, then you're allowed to, says the Gemara. How come everyone holds it permitted? Why? Because something that my body enjoys is no different than oichel nefesh. It's like eating food. And therefore you're allowed to. That's his opinion. That's Avasi. Makes us a question. So, is a sweep. We learned the following, but first thing he said was that you don't sweep between the beds on Yom Tov, but in my family they did. What are you talking about? I remember I used to go with my father into your family's house. I saw the failures. They did not sweep the floors. What are you talking about? What they did was they sweep the floors prior to Yom Tov. They put the cloth, like a carpet or something on the ground next to the sofas. And the following day, when the guests would come, at night they ate, would make crumbs everywhere. But the guests would come, they would just remove these rugs, whatever they had there. The house is clean. They didn't sweep on Yom Tov proper. They said to him, if that's what happened, why on Yom Tov? Shabbos also, you can bend before Shabbos, put these sheets on the ground or whatever, and then take it away. So they disagreed with him. Number two, Gamliel said, he said that you're not allowed to place spices in Yom Tov, but the Haz Gamliel, they would put, like it says on Mishnah. Again, what are you talking about? I went a number of times with my father to your family. They never did on Yom Tov. They would bring they brought these kind of vessels that are full of holes, metal. They would put coal in there and they would put the spices in there before Yom Tov, but they blocked all the holes. They blocked all the holes so the fragrance remained inside these vessels. But the following day, when the people came in the house, all they did was they took away all of these blockers that were in the holes. The house only smelled nice. They never did this on Yom Tov. They said to him, that's what they did. They could do it on Shabbos as well if they had that in mind. So therefore, it says clearly from here, they're arguing if you're allowed to put fragrance in the room. Ravasi said that everyone agrees you're allowed to, on Yom Tov, put on the coal to give a nice fragrance in the room. The whole argument is regarding clothing. Here we see they're clearly arguing regarding whether you're allowed to put fragrance in the room or not. On the contrary, this is what Ravasi actually said. The whole argument is that Gamliel says you're allowed to put a nice fragrance in the room because it's just like eating food. It's a dover, and the Rabbanan disagree. And why did Rabbanan disagree? Because they say it has to be a dover hashavah l'chol nefesh, and this idea of having a nice fragrance in the room is only for the aristocracy, not for everybody. Avo legame, but to actually place on the clothes, also that is forbidden. That is forbidden. We'll soon see why. Because we're going to see that's like moiled recha, you're creating a new smell into something else. You now do that on a nice fragrance into something else. The question is, are you allowed to then have these psamim on the coal to put a fragrance into your fruits? You want to smoke your fruits to give it a nice flavor. Can you do that or not? Rabbi Yirmiyah said, it's forbidden. Why? It's not a shavu l'chol nefesh. Who appreciates such elegant food? Only people who are able to eat such elegant foods. Not everybody can, so therefore it's not something permitted. And therefore, since you're smoking and you're doing a malacha, you can't do that if it's not davar l'chol nefesh. And furthermore, when you're putting the spices on the coal, you're doing a malacha. You're extinguishing a little bit of the fire, and then the fire gets bigger. You can't. And Shmuel says, mutter, you're allowed to. Why are you allowed to? Interesting thing. He says that everybody, if they would have tasted it, they would have wanted it as well. They just didn't, they couldn't afford it, or they never had the possibility to taste it. That's not what he said. That's still called davar hashava l'chol nefesh, because it has a potential. If they would have been able to afford it, if they would have tasted it, they would want it as well. Therefore, it's shavu l'chol nefesh. So the Gemara says, sorry, I missed something. He said, you're not allowed to nation mechabe. He said, you're doing a malacha. You're doing a malacha, which is you're extinguishing. When you place the spices on the coal, you're extinguishing it. If you're doing a malacha and yom tov, you can only do it if it's oichel nefesh or a davar hashava l'chol nefesh, and that's not what this case is. So you can't. If you're really going to attack us because you're saying you're extinguishing, what about the fact that you're making the fire as well? Because something get catch on fire, so you're sort of burning. You're right. You're right. It's two stages. First it extinguishes, and then it gets bigger. You do malachas, exactly right. And because you do malachas, it has to be davar shel nefesh. Amar Rabbi Yehuda says, al gabe gacheles asur. And you're not allowed to put the spices directly on the coal because you're extinguishing and lighting. Al gabe cheles, you put it on something on a hot clay piece, then mutter is permitted. Why? Because you're not extinguishing anything. And also, even though maybe it's sort of burning up, but you're not doing it the normal way. That's not how you normally cook things, by putting it on a clay shard. And therefore, there's no Isser in the Torah. And even though it's not the Shulchan Nefesh, it's all right. He says, even on Chedes is forbidden. Why? You are putting in, I guess, you're placing a reyach onto something else. You're placing, by putting the spices on this cheres. The cheres now has a new fragrance. So you've created a reach in this cheres, and that is forbidden the rabbanon because it's moiled. It looks like you created something new, and you're not allowed to do that. And the Gemara continues, but I guess we should maybe stop, and you'll continue tomorrow with your normal share. And so all have a good night. We'll continue Mitzvah Shabbos. Maybe this time should be like